Yeah, I realise I'm the last person before we can all go and have drinks, so I will keep it nice and short. And we're going to listen to some musical examples as well, which should hopefully keep us awake at the end of today. So, musical analysis versus musical performance. Which of these two things can teach us more about music? That is what we are hoping to find out. So, by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that we will all understand the traditional ways in which analysis has been used to improve musical performances, to critique this mapping of analysis onto performance, and we're going to think about new ways in which performance might also be able to improve analysis. So, we're going to start off by going together through an analysis of a piece of music by Bartók. This is the second movement of his first piano concerto, and a bit of background on Bartók before we start analysing it is that he wrote a lot of music based on folk melodies. So he went around his native country, Hungary, and picked up a lot of folk melodies which he then incorporated into his compositions. So a lot of people think that his music is very closely linked to nature, and that a lot of the things that you hear sound quite pure, perhaps. So bearing this in mind, I thought it might be worth looking to see if there is any evidence of the golden ratio in his music. And I'm just going to rush through this because I think there are people here who could explain this much better than I could. But I think basically if you add together these two numbers divided by the first, and if they're in this ratio, then that's the golden ratio, which comes up with roughly this number. I think that's right. It's considered aesthetically pleasing and has been found to occur in a lot of things in nature. It's also been found in a lot of buildings, and even the Apple logo, which is considered aesthetically pleasing for these reasons because it has the golden ratio in it. So back to our example. There are 708 quaver beats in this movement, and I know that because I counted them all myself several times. A quaver beat is half a beat, or for the Americans amongst us, it's called an eighth note, but that's really confusing, so we'll just leave that. With the golden ratio, if you divide the 708 quaver beats by the golden ratio, you find this number. And sure enough, the climax of the movement appears on the 438th quaver of the whole piece, which was pretty exciting, I thought. And you know that from looking at the score because it gets louder, so double forte means basically as loud as you can play in music. And you have extra instruments, especially extra percussion, that make it really loud at this moment. And thicker texture, which just means that, especially in the piano part, there are more notes going on at the same time. So we're going to listen to this passage from the about 2/3 of the way through the movement, which is where the golden ratio appears. I'm going to follow it through with red light for us. So don't worry if you don't have that much experience reading music. Basically, it starts along here, goes on to the next bit, and then continues across here. And I'll follow it through for us. So this is recording number 1, and I want you to think if you can hear where the golden ratio occurs. And then we're going to listen to a second recording, and again listen to see if you think the golden ratio occurs there, and we'll compare the two recordings based on what you can hear.
This is the first one?
Yes. It's
all working on the thing, so I'll do it this way, hopefully.
If you just click the...
Yeah, it's not working like that. I hope it'll work this way.
Okay. So I don't know about you, but I couldn't really hear that occurring at that point in the music. And you could even say that maybe the performers have missed the point a bit if they're not drawing attention to this moment in the piece. The second one, okay, I think it's great.
Okay.
Have you got the second recording there?
Yep.
Okay, so the second recording, let's listen through and see if you think you can hear this golden section. First recording or second recording? Good, okay, so this is how analysis has traditionally been linked up to performance as a way of criticising performances that are taking place, such as, we've got the slides back.
Fun?
The slides
Oh, is
back.
it doing? Sorry. Bless your luck.
There we go. Such as Melbourne 1988. The study of music theory should enable performers to determine not only how individual musical artworks are structured, but should also endow performers with the means to discover how different interpretations alter the listener's perception. So basically what he's saying is that we should study music so that we can educate performers and make sure that performers are telling the audience what the audience can understand so they enjoy the music a bit better. And the problem with this is created a lot of bad relationships in the past between musicologists and performers, such as this quotation, which probably wasn't Schoenberg, but here we go. The performer, for all his intolerable arrogance, is totally unnecessary, except as his interpretations make the music understandable to an audience unfortunate enough not to be able to read it in print. So you can see where there are a lot of problems with this historically. And it reminds me of a little story from the 19th century of Brahms, who was invited to go along to a performance of the St. Matthew Passion by Bach. And he said, "No thank you, I would rather sit at home and read the score." And funnily enough, the St. Matthew Passion is actually being put on in chapel on Tuesday, and I think I would rather go and listen to it being performed by the choir than sitting at home by myself reading a score. But maybe that's just me. So going back to our question of analysis and performance, all it's really useful for is telling us which CD to buy. So I can tell you from the 2 recordings, I'm not going to name and shame the first one, but the second one, if you want to go and buy it, this is the CD, which is more analytically informed based on what we were studying. But the big problem with this is that it doesn't actually teach us very much about analysing the music. It tells us which performers might be better than others according to certain criteria, but it doesn't teach us much about the music. So we'll leave Bartók and the golden ratio behind for now and move on to our next example, which is a very beautiful prelude by Chopin. It's this E minor prelude, and I think a few of you might recognise it when we listen to it in a moment. And this prelude has been analysed in a very traditional way by Schenker, who created these methods in interwar Germany. All this notation symbolises different things, but basically the white notes here are what he considers are really important according to the way that he's studying the music. And this method of analysis is based on looking at the score. He probably didn't, especially looking at these dates, he probably didn't go away and listen to lots of recordings. He looked at the score, he analysed it, and he came up with the conclusions without listening to it, perhaps. So, on this copy of the score, I've put Schenker's traditional analytical observations in orange. This is where he thinks the important moments are in the piece. In blue are what our performer thinks are important. So the performance we're going to listen to in a moment is Alfred Cortot, and these are the bits that I think he draws attention to, and we'll listen to it in a moment and see if you agree with me. In pink are the bits where they both think are important, but you'll notice there aren't actually that many bits in pink here. So it's quite interesting how they disagree on a lot of points. One is a performer, one is an analyst. See what you think comes across more strongly when you're listening to it, please. I'll follow along again. So I hope you had a chance to hear for yourself there the differences that can be revealed from a performance of a piece compared to just from analysing it with the score alone. So the key findings from the bar-top-golden ratio example we had earlier are that musical analysis can inform and criticise a musical performance, but it can't do much else. It's very useful in some ways, but not in others. There are some methods of analysis, such as the traditional analysis of the Chopin just now, which are useful again in some ways, but not entirely. They might miss some points because of not having heard or really studied performances of the music. Performances could therefore be used to affect how we analyse music. And the big question to leave you with, is it possible to develop a method of musical analysis that combines the performer's views with traditional analytical methods? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but maybe if you ask me in the summer, I might. We will see. Here's a condensed bibliography. If you want the whole thing, please email me. Do we have any questions, please? Yes.
So is this analysis always consistent with people's subjective feeling, especially about emotion in this music?
Do you mean the performer's feelings or the listener's feelings?
Yeah, listeners' feeling.
Yeah, do you mean is the traditional method that we're doing just now? It hasn't really been found to tie in with some studies that have been done of when people listen to music. Actually, it often hasn't, and that's one of the deficiencies, because if you are just looking at the score, you're not really thinking about how people hear music. You're only thinking about how they read music, and not many of us would rather sit at home and follow a score than listen to it. So it's not so much really. I think that's one of its big flaws. Yes.
Have the composers ever commented on
Well, yeah, so the quotation which was attributed to Schoenberg earlier, he was quite an important composer at the beginning of the 20th century. So there are some composers who think that performers get in the way, or performers are embellishing things with their own thoughts without having much regard for the composer's thoughts. But there are other composers who think that actually a performer might shed more insight into the work. And for example, Stravinsky, he composed a lot of music at the beginning of the 20th century as well, did 5 separate recordings of The Rite of Spring, and we have all of these recordings, they still survive. Which one is the definitive composer's recording? Because he did all of them, and they're all quite different. So actually, performers are bringing out different things which the composer might agree with all of them, or none of them. Yes?
You sort of if you look at the performer's perspective on music, you're sort of required to have some criteria for what the performer is considering or trying to bring up. Right? I mean, say, looking at the example you showed with Chopin.
Yeah.
I don't think I necessarily always agree with your choices as to what to bring out, but that's also subjective because you're a listener. So you have more objective criteria for saying this is significant in the performance.
So what I was trying to base it on was where they might draw attention to things through the dynamics or the volume that they're using, and also through rubato or timing and manipulations to the timing. And yes, you're right, it was very subjective the way that we did it just now, and I'm hoping when I continue this further to use some software where it actually tells you precisely what the volume is and what the timing is, and you can get a whole load of data based on that. But for these purposes so far, that's all I did, I'm afraid. But that is possible, and that's something I'll do next.
So, I mean, on the one hand, you could say what absolute levels, but you can also look at trying to distinguish what's implied in the score with what's actually performed.
Yeah. So what's implied in the score would be like the traditional analysis that we were looking at just then, and then what the performer perceives. You can partly only really tell through their recordings, but there are a couple of performers, such as Alfred Brendel, famous pianist, who actually wrote about things as well as performing them. So I think that would be a really interesting line to pursue as well.
Okay, shall we leave it there? Thank you. So that concludes the daytime events of the conference.